In fact, I've never met anyone who voted for Trump who didn't believe that he really did understand that mass migration is terrible for the United States, as it has been terrible for Europe, as it was terrible for Central Asia under the Mongols. It's always terrible. It's too much change, too fast, and it destroys the pre-existing culture every single time. So we know that. That's not racism. That's nature. And Trump knew that, and he said it. And most people who hated him and loved him, thought he meant it as he said it. Why did they think that? Because he kept saying it. This is one feature of Trump's program that remained consistent from 2015 all the way up until election night 2024. Here is Trump that year, that campaign, on stage with Kamala Harris in the now famous moment where he accused the Haitians of the Midwest of eating the dogs and cats. Watch.
What they have done to our country by allowing these millions and millions of people to come into our country, and look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. And a lot of towns don't want to talk. It's not going to be Aurora or Springfield. A lot of towns don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating.
2015 all the way up until election night 2024. Here is Trump that year, that campaign, on stage with Kamala Harris in the now famous moment where he accused people who hated him and loved him, thought he meant it as he said it. Why did they think that? Is terrible for the United States, as it has been terrible for Europe, as it was terrible for Central Asia under the Mongols. It's probably did understand that mass migration is terrible for the United States, as it has been terrible for Europe, as it was terrible for Central Asia under the Mongols. It's always terrible. It's too much change, too fast, and it destroys the pre-existing culture every single time. So we know that. That's not racism. That's nature. And Trump knew that, and he said it. And most people who hated him and loved him, thought he meant it as he said it. Why did they think that? Because he kept saying it. This is one feature of Trump's program that remained consistent from 2015 all the way up until election night 2024. Here is Trump that year, that campaign, on stage with Kamala Harris in the now famous moment where he accused the Haitians of the Midwest of eating the dogs and cats. Watch.
What they have done to our country by allowing these millions and millions of people to come into our country, and look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. And a lot of towns don't want to talk. It's not going to be Aurora or Springfield. A lot of towns don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
Really one of the great moments in political history. And of course it worked on a couple of different levels. On a political level, this is what the kids call trolling. Trump says something knowing it will provoke outrage, blind outrage, in fact blind rage, and that every liberal on social media will be spouting, just fuming, sputtering, spitting, huffing, and that anger will provoke them, his opponents, to take positions that are totally out of line with where the rest of the public is. In other words, by making them mad, he makes them more extreme, and that extremism sinks their ship in the end. It's smart. It may be corrosive, it may be damaging long term, but as a political tactic, that works. And no one did it better, no one does it better to this day than Donald Trump. So on that level, it was a success. But on a deeper level, it worked because there's a lot of truth in that. Were the Haitians eating the dogs and cats in Springfield? I don't know. They certainly could have been. Has mass migration, third world mass migration, made small towns in America better? Only people who've never been to those towns could claim it has. Anyone who's actually been to those towns or lives in one, or has gotten in a car and driven through lightly populated parts of the country in the last 15 years, what does it look like? It looks awful. It's dying. And the solution in state after state, and town after town, city after city, beginning with Chicago, long our second biggest city, now our third, but in all kinds of cities has been, the tax base is gone, got a lot of empty apartments. We're going to fill them up with immigrants. And they've done that. And the effect has been devastating to the country. It's not an attack on those immigrants. Most of them are looking for a better life. Whether or not they care about the United States, in many cases they don't. Many of them don't even seek citizenship. They don't care. They're here to make money for their families back home. That doesn't make them evil. Most of them aren't evil. Some of them are criminals. But most of them aren't. In fact, a lot of them are very hard workers. So it's not an attack on them to say that it has been utterly devastating to the communities in which they've moved or been moved. Because everything changes instantly. And what does that mean for the people who live in those communities, who grew up there, who had no role at all in this policy, who wouldn't sign off on it if they'd had the chance, but of course were never given the chance. They weren't even asked. It happened to them. People who live far away, who have more power than they do, impose this on them for reasons that had nothing to do with their well-being or thriving. It was a kind of punishment imposed from afar. That's how they experience it, because that's what it is. And they're resentful about that. That doesn't make them racist. Most of them aren't racist. Whatever that means. By the way, the people throwing around the term racist never define it. But they're not bad people. They're not evil. They don't hate others because of their skin color. They just don't want their neighborhood to change overnight and become a foreign experience. Who would want that? And by the way, the people making these decisions never impose these decisions on their own neighborhoods. And if you don't believe it, drive through their neighborhoods. Look up the 15 richest zip codes in the United States, and they're also the most stable zip codes because they are not subjected to mass migration. So that kind of tells you the whole story right there. Martha's Vineyard looks a lot like it did 50 years ago. So does Nantucket. So does Brookline, Massachusetts. So does Aspen. If it's so great, then why don't they have 10,000 Haitians living in Martha's Vineyard? Because it's not great. That's why. It's not an attack on the Haitians. It's the nature of mass migration, taking people from a completely different culture with no education, limited skills, and no money, and dropping them into what was formerly a pretty prosperous, stable community. Who benefits? Not the formerly prosperous community. If you think that's racist, then go away, because that's absurd. It's not. It's real. And Trump made that point. He was brave enough to do that, and God bless him for doing it. So because he said that, and many things like that, normal people who don't just dismiss all challenges to their worldview as racism or anti-Semitism, but try to critically assess what others are saying, those people said to themselves, he's onto something here. Like, what are we doing to Springfield, Ohio? Why aren't we doing that to Bethesda, Maryland? Well, we're not doing it to Bethesda, Maryland, because Bethesda, Maryland is rich, and members of Congress live there. That's why. In Springfield, Ohio, where is that? Who cares? That's like post-industrial hell. We can do whatever we want to them. And if we want to construct artificially a new voting base in the middle of Ohio, if we want to change it from red to blue or whatever our plan is, we just want to weaken America and divide it so it can't oppose us collectively, which may be part of the plan. But whatever our aim is, we can do it in Springfield, Ohio, because who's going to stop us? They don't have a lobby in D.C. Miriam Adelson doesn't care what happens in Springfield, Ohio. So that's what happened, and everybody knows that. And let's stop lying about it. And Trump was one of the only people not to lie about it. And of course he expressed it inartfully, kind of retarded way, but it doesn't make it less true. So it was on the basis of that, and his opposition to foreign wars, that got him elected in 2024. So what happened then? Well, a lot happened then. On the other hand, not much happened then. As you're about to learn as we talk to the recently departed head of Border Patrol, Greg Bovino, who spent 30 years in the Border Patrol and was hired early on to get our immigration system under control. One of the things that happened is that there was turnover in who ran our immigration system. Now, it's mostly run from Washington, of course, and ICE and the Border Patrol are the two main instruments.
My finally attuned brain just can't calculate how they did it.
Deal too big. And not cost you. Yeah, it is a big deal.
Get 2 large pizzas for $4.99 each. Pizza.
take a look at the new head of the entire immigration enforcement operation. This is a former senator from Oklahoma called Markwayne Mullin, and he's taken over in the last year. This is the guy Trump hired to deport over 100 million illegals. Watch this.
We have naturalization ceremonies every single day in the United States that federal government's open.
Experience matters. After a devastating attack, Susan Collins led the way forward, enacting historic bipartisan reforms that made us safer. Susan saved 250,000 Maine jobs. She protects access to quality health care, and she delivered the Social Security Fairness Act, boosting the incomes of 25,000 Maine retirees. America's most bipartisan senator, always working for Maine.
We have hundreds of thousands of people. In fact, we're real close to 900,000 individuals that have been naturalized in the last 12 months. There's a legal system to go through.
Wait a second. This is the guy who runs Department of Homeland Security, Markwayne Mullin, who was hired by Trump to deport all these illegals who came into the country over the last 20 years, but particularly over the 4 years under Joe Biden. 50 million, they told us. And here he is this month, that was August 4th of this month, sitting before the National Governors Association bragging about how many of these people have become citizens. Almost a million, 900,000. What? Was that the promise? Did Trump run less than 2 years ago on the promise to give citizenship to people who came here illegally? Wasn't it the opposite of that? And if it was the opposite of that, why did he hire one of the most liberal Republicans in the Senate, one of the most pro-illegal immigration Republicans in the entire Senate, and that's saying a lot, Markwayne Mullin, to run deportation? This is starting to feel like a betrayal. Oh, but it gets worse. Here's what Markwayne Mullin went on to say to the governors on August 4th of this year.
What I'm saying is, let me work with you on this stuff. I'm not handling things like maybe the past secretary had. I'm just saying, let's work to get the worst of the worst off the streets, and then you won't see me in your cities and states like you do as much, because my presence won't be as big. In fact, you probably won't even see us at all.
Oh, we're going to stop enforcing immigration law. We're going to go after the worst of the worst, the criminals, who, by the way, presumably could be rounded up by local or state law enforcement. Isn't that their job? This is the head of federal immigration enforcement. The guy whose job was literally paid to enforce immigration law, laws that were passed by the Congress. These aren't regulations that came out of the agencies. These are laws passed by the democratic process. In other words, you vote for someone so he can make a law that reflects your views and your values. That's what democracy is. And he does, and then this guy is hired to make sure those laws are enforced. And here he is telling the 50 governors that actually, I'm not going to enforce those laws. Now, if he worked for Joe Biden, this would be a scandal. It would be on every Fox News show all day long. Here's the head of the Department of Homeland Security saying he's not going to enforce immigration law. Oh my gosh, they're open borders people, which they were. This is Trump's guy, Markwayne Mullin, making the same claim. And so the point is really simple. The true betrayal of the second Trump term may not be foreign policy. That's the most damaging thing Trump or any American president has ever done, beginning a fruitless war with Iran and thereby destroying our empire and probably our dollar. But in terms of a political betrayal, what Trump has not done in immigration is more profound. Because you probably won't find a single Trump voter who disagreed with Trump's views on immigration. And once again, this is why Trump was able to move from the private sector as a branding guy to the White House as an American president, was on the basis of his promises on immigration. So for him to betray those promises is profound. And it's understandable that most people who voted for him can't metabolize this, don't want to deal with it, want to believe we've sealed the border and everything's fine. But at a certain point, it's important to know exactly where we are. Not just speculate about it or cite some study from Yale on what's the state of illegal immigration in the United States, but talk to the guy who ran it, Greg Bovino, who ran Border Patrol, who has the actual numbers on this question. How many illegal aliens are in the United States? These are people who are foreign nationals, who are living here illegally, who have broken the law to get here and are breaking the law in every single case, every single day, by using fake documents to work and collect benefits and send their kids to public school and to use the emergency room at public expense, etc., etc., etc. And these are not minor laws, these are core laws that if you broke, you would be punished for breaking. So how many of those are there? How many were in this country the day Trump was inaugurated, January 20th, 2025, and how many are here now? What are the real numbers? No one has pointed this out. Democrats have no incentive to point it out, of course. ICE shot a couple protesters last year, and so the emphasis has been on that. They're murderous thugs. Okay, we can debate that. Obviously, shooting unarmed people is bad, never defend it. But that's not the whole story. The whole story is that immigration enforcement in the United States has stopped. Has stopped. And this fact, which is a central fact, which will define what our country is like going forward, or even if it exists as a coherent country, is being completely ignored. Home ownership has always been at the center of the American dream. It is an actual asset, a place people work their entire lives to build, a place of stability and security and real value. Right now, though, too many homeowners are stuck swiping credit cards to cover groceries. There's basically a survival tax of 20% interest or more. So why keep handing your money to the banks when you could keep it for your family? Interest is what kills you. Our friends at American Financing have a better way. They're helping homeowners use their hard-earned equity, and they're supporting Americans looking to fulfill the dream of owning a home with mortgage rates currently in the 5s. American Financing saves its customers an average of $800 a month. That's about 10 grand a year. It's not just a loan, it's a true financial reset. We recommend American Financing. They're called America's home loans for a reason. So, who just left the Trump administration? AmericanFinancing.net/Tucker. So, without further delay, this is Greg Bovino, who just left the Trump administration, ran Border Patrol, has the actual numbers on this stuff, was there while it was happening. We believe he is telling the truth. You should listen carefully to this interview, and you should pay special and very close attention to his description of what the administration is now trying to do to him. It's shocking. Greg Bovino. Greg Bovino, thank you very much for doing this. So just to kind of set it in context, what is the state of illegal immigration in the United States today, to the extent that we know? Like, how many illegal immigrants live in the United States? How many have been deported since Trump got elected, etc.? Like, where are we?
Tucker, thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
Of course.
State of illegal immigration, one word comes to mind, that's catastrophe. Right now in the United States, I've got the number at 107 million illegal aliens currently residing with impunity, I might add, in the United States today.
107 million?
107 million, 1/4 of the population. We've got 330,000 approximately American citizens. Add another 107 million onto that. I think you can look around in any state, any region, or any city in the United States, if you're just a regular American citizen, and say, well, you know what? There's an awful lot of illegal aliens and foreigners in our country.
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely different country because it's got a completely different population, and you're discouraged from saying that for some reason. People are bullied into silence on the question, but I mean, it's not the same country. It's not even close. And, you know, better in some ways, worse in a lot of ways, but it's totally different. And I assume that was mostly because of legal immigration, but 107 million illegal?
Illegal. The ones that came right across that border, and not only over the past few years under the Biden administration, but look at what's happened over the past 40 years.
Why are we fighting a war with Iran? Sorry, well, it makes me mad. Why are we using our $1.5 trillion military to fight a war across the world when we have 107 million illegal aliens in our country?
We've said it many times in the Border Patrol, the war is on American soil. The war, the effort, that true effort is on American soil. So I agree with you on that. 100%, Tucker, is the wars on American soil, and it's not a war to simply deport those 107 million illegal aliens. This is survival of the species, ladies and gentlemen. We are at that precipice of, are we going to remain, the United States, the country of our values, traditions, and beliefs, or are we going to devolve into something completely different? If we don't do something quick and fight that war here on American soil, we're there.
But I mean, that was the whole point of getting Trump elected twice, was to stop illegal immigration, build a wall, which he didn't do. And then, okay, we'll give another chance. 2024, hire Greg Bovino to run Border Patrol, Tom Homan, tough on immigration or whatever, like Stephen Miller, he means it. And the one thing you knew about Trump was we were going to deport people who are here illegally because they have no right to be here. They're breaking the law. I go to jail if I break the law, but if you're from a foreign country, you get subsidies to come here if you break the law. Like, it doesn't make any sense. But that hasn't happened, has it?
It happened for that very short period of time in the interior when the Border Patrol and the U.S. Border Patrol was in the interior, and then with the surrender in Minnesota, it stopped the 77 million voters that voted for mass deportations. I guess they didn't matter anymore. But it does matter. It matters to you, it matters to me, it matters to those 77 million people. It matters to those 22,000 Border Patrol agents who put their life on the line in those cities to have that rug jerked out from under them by those Homans and those Commissioner Rodney Scotts.
Okay, so now, without getting, the federal government is its own field of study. Okay, you could get a PhD in it and still not understand that it's the largest human organization in history. It spends $7 trillion a year, so it's hard to understand what it is. But in terms that non-experts can understand, what is the difference between the Border Patrol and ICE?
A vast difference. The U.S. Border Patrol is the uniformed branch of Department of Homeland Security. CBP and the U.S. Border, they wear uniforms. They wear a uniform just like a police officer you might see in a city.
Right.
They wear uniforms. They are the immigration police, the uniformed immigration police. Then we've got ICE.
Border Patrol. They've been around forever, right?
Been here 102 years.
Wow.
And they've had that interior border mission for all 102 years. It was the U.S. Border Patrol, the Marine Corps Federal Law Enforcement, that expeditionary force that would go into the United States over those 102 years, and there are many examples of that, to deport up to millions of illegal aliens. It's always been their mission, and right now, that uniformed immigration force is standing shoulder to shoulder on the border, staring south, twiddling their thumbs. Largest Border Patrol in history, now taken off the table. The most highly trained immigration police that you have, taken right out of the game. Why would you take your pro squad or your varsity squad out of the game?
I'm totally confused. So there's two parts of this question. There's the border, the line between the United States and Mexico and Canada. And then there's the question of the 107 illegal aliens living in the country. So you often hear people say, well, we sealed the borders, so Trump succeeded. I don't think that's correct. I don't think that's what success is, but have the borders been sealed?
The borders are under control more than they ever have been in my lifetime. However, when you don't have that interior immigration enforcement, that mass deportation, what does that do to your border? What does that do to the cartels and the transnational criminal organizations that are going to push people across that border? No defense in history has ever been 100%. None will ever be 100%. What does that do? Well, if I make it past those Border Patrol agents who are standing on the line facing south, I got a freebie. Tucker, I got a freebie. I got a freebie because if I get into the interior, there are no mass deportations occurring. There is the worst of the worst and the targeted criminal enforcement that sounds so great. What illegal alien crossing the border is going to say, well, gosh, I'm the worst of the worst, I better not cross? None of them think that. So what that does to your border is that makes your border less secure, and you will see that over a period of time that they are going to try and come across that border, and they'll succeed, because all they have to do is make it into the interior. And once they make it into the interior, they're up against ICE. You ask what the difference between ICE and Border Patrol. ICE, fantastic. There's patriots there. I love the ICE agents. I worked with them for that year. Tough individuals. They got a tough mission, but remember, that is your non-uniformed immigration officers, the ones that go into jails and arrest known criminals, long-term investigations. They're your plainclothes detectives. Tucker, would you send New York City police detectives into the most violent situation that New